Whenever I'm confronted with a surprising statement, I'm driven to math to try and understand the probability that what I've heard is true. I think this is a good practice for everybody to follow, which is in part why I make these videos. Mathematics helps us to figure out the truth of a statement more readily and quickly and without emotional bias getting in the way. So this video combines religion with a little bit of math, which is always a tricky prospect, but I'm going to work us through it. With the following simple arguments, I will be analyzing the statement, I am Christian because I was divinely influenced and not because of where I happen to live. And I will hopefully convince you that such a statement should never be believed. Now for some opening statistics. The world population is approximately 7 billion. Wikipedia claims that there are approximately 2.4 billion Christians, largely residing in Europe and the Americas, with several large populations outside of those two areas. In the United States, according to the same wiki page, there are nearly 250 million Christians, or approximately 80% of the population. With these figures in hand, let us begin with only the basic mathematics. If you ask someone if they would be Muslim had they been born in Pakistan, or Hindu in India, or Buddhist in Nepal, many will inevitably say no, that God spoke to them directly and showed them the path, or something similar. So let's take them at their word and see what the probability is that all these people of all these different religions are speaking the truth. So let's suppose, for example, that one person in 10,000 is truly, actually, divinely inspired. Now, I choose this number because I've heard several Christians make this claim in my lifetime, and I don't know that many people. So if it was any less than that, chances are that I would not have heard it as many times as I have. Nevertheless, this analysis that I'm about to present holds up if you change the order of magnitude in either direction. So given this number, that means that in the United States there ought to be about 30,000 divinely inspired disciples running around, of which approximately 24,000 should be Christians, just going off of God's record at getting it right in the United States. At the same time, the world average for getting it right, as it were, is about 2.4 out of 7. So, given this, what are the chances that America just happens to have an 80% believer rate? In other words, if God is choosing his disciples purely randomly, what is the probability that such a high concentration are in America? So to determine this, I wrote a short MATLAB script that examined 10,000 populations of 30,000 people each, with each individual having a 34% or 2.4 out of 7 chance of being Christian. I then asked the computer to tell me the average number of Christians based on these 10,000 populations, and also the standard deviation. For those of you that are unfamiliar with standard deviation, one interpretation is a measure of confidence in a measurement. When data follows a normal distribution, one standard deviation, or sigma, above and below the average, encloses a range in which approximately 68.3% of results fall. 2 sigma above and below the average encompasses 95.4%, and so on and so forth. In physics, if a result falls outside of 5 sigma, then it is accepted as a confirmed result and not a statistical aberration. In other words, it is extremely unlikely that the result obtained just happened to be by chance. So using my little script, my MATLAB script, I found an average of 10,288 Christians out of 30,000 with a standard deviation of 81. That means that having 24,000 Christians out of 30,000 disciples is 169.3 standard deviations above the mean. To give a better idea of how unlikely this is, in order to get 10,855 Christians, or 7 sigma above the mean, I would have to run this analysis 390,682,215,444 times in order to have approximately a 37% chance of finding one instance when 10,855 Christians were randomly created. And this is many thousands less than the 24,000 we would expect in this model, or that we were looking for to represent the United States. So therefore, we have to conclude that the distribution of Christians in the United States is not random. Another interesting line of analysis is to consider the 6,000 American disciples that don't become Christians, the ones for whom God gets it wrong, or Satan intervenes, or whatever. One must wonder, what do they become? If one of the other world religions happens to be correct, and they just so happen to become that religion without any outside influence, I mean, that would be remarkable, and we would expect to hear about it. And similarly, we can apply this analysis in the reverse. With 34% of the world being Christian, of the 670,000 non-American disciples in the world, going on that 1 in 10,000 number, 229,810 of them should be Christian. In Pakistan alone, for example, with a population of 187 million, we should expect approximately 6,000 Christian disciples being created. So can you imagine the reaction we would receive from the Christian world if some Pakistani kid reproduced even a single part of the Bible without ever having been exposed to it? That would nearly qualify as a miracle, and yet we never hear of any stories like this. If you're born in Pakistan, almost without exception, you become Muslim. So, now we have to ask ourselves, what would cause this non-randomness? The obvious answer lies in the history of religions in countries, such as our country largely being founded by the Puritans who were, Christian and escaping from England, and other Christian immigrants coming from Europe. But, if we were to accept that answer, then our chosen disciple is Christian, not because of divine inspiration, but because of geography, just where he or she happened to be born, and not for some supernatural reason. So another answer that one will occasionally hear is that America is God's chosen country for some reason, such as we're more moral or more religious, and therefore he influences Americans at a higher rate. These arguments are demonstrably false, however. With regard to morality, America has approximately 4.8 intentional homicides per 100,000 people. This is higher than, for example, that in Iran, 3.9, Libya 1.7, Saudi Arabia 0.8, and Japan 0.3. In terms of money donated, 57% of Americans have donated money, less than Canada at 64%, Thailand at 71%, and Ireland also at 71%. In terms of time spent volunteering, 42% of Americans have spent time volunteering compared to 43% in Sri Lanka and 58% in Turkmenistan. As for religiosity, 65% of Americans say religion is important in their daily lives, compared with 100% in Bangladesh, 99% in Sri Lanka, 97% in Pakistan, 87% in Brazil, and 79% in India. As for weekly attendance, 44% of Americans participate in a religious service, compared to 89% in Nigeria, 68% in the Philippines, 46% in Mexico, and 45% in Italy. Now, these numbers can be contested to some degree and certainly change from year to year, but it should be clear that the U.S. doesn't dominate in any one category related to morality. At the same time, plenty of other countries that perform similarly in moral categories, such as much of Western Europe, have much lower rates of religious adherence. So we have to ask ourselves, why has God forsaken Western Europe? Why has God forsaken all these other irreligious countries that are still considered to be just as moral as the United States, or even more so? So now, I come to the end of this analysis because I think that the case I've presented is relatively ironclad. I can really think of no other argument for why God would choose America over other countries, except for, some unknown, inexplicable reason. So given this analysis, I hope that you will agree that any Christian that claims to be Christian for reasons that don't include geography and history is mistaken at best and dishonest at worst. And once you realize that your religion is almost entirely determined by your birthplace and family history, doesn't it make you question why anyone should adhere to it so strongly when by accident they could have been believing in some other deity? Perhaps it would be more constructive to believe in something more transcendent and less dependent upon cultural identity.